At 9 a.m. that morning, I was called into the small conference room. It took less than 10 minutes for him to end my job and my dignity. But he had no idea that by 5 p.m., his entire career would end in a way I orchestrated myself. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But sometimes justice can't wait. Sometimes, when someone thinks they've destroyed you completely, they've actually just lit the fuse to their own downfall. This is the story of how the worst day of my life became his. My name is Claire Morgan, and for the past 4 years, I've been a data analyst at Northwood Dynamics, a mid-sized tech consulting firm nestled in the heart of Ravenport, a bustling city on the East Coast. At 32, I'd built my life around precision and patterns, finding comfort in spreadsheets and algorithms while the chaos of corporate politics swirled around me. Every morning, I'd arrive at the glass tower on Madison Street at 7:45 sharp, coffee in hand, ready to dive into the numbers that told the real story of our company's performance. My desk on the 14th floor overlooked the city's financial district. Though I rarely had time to appreciate the view, I was too busy cleaning up messes, finding discrepancies, and making sure our reports actually reflected reality. A thankless job that kept the company running smoothly while others took the credit. My life outside these walls was deliberately simple. A one-bedroom apartment 15 minutes away, a cat named Fitzgerald who judged my late arrivals, and a small circle of friends who'd long stopped asking why I worked weekends. I wasn't climbing the corporate ladder for glory or wealth, I just believed in doing things right. Perhaps that's why I never saw it coming. The tension with Richard Halpern, my direct manager, had been building for months like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Richard was everything I wasn't, smooth-talking, politically savvy, and utterly ruthless beneath his practiced smile. In his mid-40s, with silver streaking his temples and suits that cost more than my monthly rent, he embodied corporate success. But I knew what others didn't. His success was built on manipulated numbers and other people's work. It started small. A shifted decimal here, a conveniently omitted dataset there. Richard would present my analyses to the board, tweaking them just enough to paint himself as a visionary while maintaining plausible deniability if things went wrong. I documented everything, thinking naively that truth would eventually matter. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago when I discovered he'd been siphoning funds from the Morrison Project, our biggest client, into a phantom consulting account. When I confronted him privately, hoping to give him a chance to correct it, he just smiled that cold smile of his and said, "Claire, you're very good with numbers, but you don't understand how business really works." I should have known then that my days were numbered. Richard didn't tolerate threats to his carefully constructed empire, but I'd underestimated just how quickly he would move to eliminate me. The morning it all changed started like any other. I was reviewing quarterly projections when Richard's assistant knocked on my cubicle wall. "He wants to see you in conference room B," she said, avoiding eye contact. The small conference room, the one they used for firings. As I walked down the hallway, passing the motivational posters about teamwork and integrity, I felt the weight of 4 years of dedication sitting heavy on my shoulders. Every late night, every weekend, every time I'd chosen accuracy over advancement, it all led to this moment. I didn't know it yet, but in exactly 8 hours, Richard would be making this same walk. Only his escort would be security, and his destination would be the exit. Conference room B was suffocatingly small, with no windows and fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. Richard was already there, leaning back in his chair with that practiced look of corporate concern. An HR representative I'd never seen before sat beside him, a manila folder placed precisely in front of her. "Claire, please sit down," Richard said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm afraid we need to discuss some organizational changes." My mouth went dry. I sat down, my hands steady despite the tremor I felt building in my chest. The HR woman, her nameplate read Janet Mills, wouldn't meet my eyes. Due to budgetary constraints and a strategic restructuring of the analytics department, Richard began, reading from what was clearly a prepared script. "We're having to make some difficult decisions about staffing." "You're firing me," I said flatly. No point in dancing around it. Richard's jaw tightened slightly at my directness. We're eliminating your position, effective immediately. This is purely a business decision, nothing personal. Nothing personal. The words hung in the air like a bad joke. 3 weeks after I'd confronted him about the Morrison Project funds, and this was nothing personal? I see. I managed, my voice surprisingly calm. And my current projects, the quarterly audit that's due next week? We'll handle the transition. Richard said smoothly. Your work has been adequate, but we need to move in a different direction. Adequate. 4 years of spotless work, catching errors that would have cost the company millions. Working 60-hour weeks without complaint. And he called it adequate. Janet finally spoke, sliding papers across the table. This is your separation agreement. You'll receive 2 weeks severance, continuation of health benefits through the end of the month, and... What about my documentation on the Morrison project? I interrupted, looking directly at Richard. His eyes turned cold, all pretense of sympathy evaporating. All company materials remain company property. You're to surrender your laptop, access cards, and any files immediately. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings. You have 10 minutes, he added, glancing at his watch. It's 9:10 now. I expect you'll be out of the building by 9:20. The humiliation was deliberate, calculated. He wanted me to break, to rage, to give him a reason to paint me as unstable. But I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. I understand, I said, standing up. I assume you'll be handling the Morrison discrepancies personally then? Richard's face flushed slightly. That's no longer your concern. Janet looked confused, glancing between us, but Richard shot her a look that shut down any questions. She pushed the folder toward me again. We'll need your signature. I'll need time to review this with my attorney, I said. It was a bluff. I didn't have an attorney, but I wanted to see Richard squirm, even just a little. Of course, Janet said quickly, before Richard could object. You have 5 business days. 2 security guards were already waiting outside the conference room. The walk to my desk felt endless, every colleague averting their eyes, some with sympathy, others with relief that it wasn't them. The office gossip mill would be churning within minutes. As I packed my things, a photo of my parents, my coffee mug with the faded "World's Okayest Employee" text, a small succulent that had somehow survived 4 years of fluorescent lighting, my mind was racing. Richard thought he'd won. He thought removing me would bury his secrets along with my career. But he'd made one crucial mistake. In his arrogance, he'd forgotten that I'd been managing the company's data systems for 4 years. I knew every backup, every archived email, every deleted file that wasn't really deleted. And more importantly, I'd been quietly documenting everything, storing copies in places Richard didn't even know existed. Ma'am, we need to go, one of the guards said, not unkindly. I picked up my box, took one last look at my desk, at the space where I'd given so much of myself, and nodded. As we walked toward the elevator, I passed Richard's office. He was already on a call, laughing about something, probably celebrating his victory. By 9:20, I was standing on the sidewalk, holding a cardboard box with 4 years of my life reduced to a few personal items. But instead of defeat, I felt something else stirring inside me. Clarity. Purpose. Richard had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He'd fired someone who knew all his secrets and thought I'd simply disappear. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. The February wind cut through my blazer as I stood on the sidewalk, still clutching the pathetic cardboard box. Around me, Ravenport's morning rush continued unabated, suits hurrying past, taxis honking, the world spinning on as if mine hadn't just stopped. My reflection in the building's glass doors showed a woman I barely recognized, pale, shell-shocked, holding the remnants of her career like a refugee. I made it 3 blocks before my legs gave out. A coffee shop materialized, Murphy's, where I'd grabbed countless morning lattes, and I stumbled inside. The warmth hit me first, then the familiar smell of espresso. And suddenly I was sobbing in the bathroom stall. my carefully maintained composure finally cracking. 4 years. 4 years of arriving early, staying late, perfecting every report, triple-checking every calculation. I'd missed my father's retirement party for a deadline, canceled dates because Richard needed emergency revisions, spent Christmas Eve fixing his mistakes while he took credit at the board meeting. The memories flooded back in painful clarity. My first day, so eager to prove myself, wearing my best suit that I'd saved 3 months to afford, Richard welcoming me to the team with that same practiced smile, telling me how valuable I'd be. The slow realization that valuable meant useful and nothing more. I remembered the late nights when the office was empty except for the cleaning crew and me, the glow of my monitor, the only light on the floor. How I'd perfected the art of sleeping in my car during lunch breaks after all-nighters. The vitamin D deficiency my doctor warned me about because I never saw sunlight. The relationships that withered because I was always too tired, too stressed, too absent. And for what? Adequate. The word burned like acid in my throat. My phone buzzed. Sarah from accounting. Claire, what happened? Richard's telling everyone you were let go for performance issues. Performance issues. The rage that surged through me was white hot, burning away the tears. I'd never missed a deadline, never submitted inaccurate work, never had a single complaint against me. But Richard was already rewriting history, painting me as the incompetent one. Another text, this one from Tom in IT. This is bullshit. Everyone knows you carried that department. Then another from Linda in HR. Off the record, I'm so sorry. This isn't right. But sympathy wouldn't pay my rent, wouldn't restore my reputation, wouldn't undo the humiliation of being marched out like a criminal while Richard sat in his corner office, protected by his title and his lies. I left the coffee shop and walked home in a daze, the city blurring around me. My apartment felt foreign, too quiet for a Tuesday morning. Fitzgerald meowed accusingly. Why was I home? Why wasn't I at work where I belonged? I don't belong there anymore, I told him, the words feeling surreal. I set the box on my kitchen table and stared at its contents. 4 years reduced to this. The photo of my parents, taken at their 40th anniversary last year. The party I'd almost missed for a quarterly review. The coffee mug someone had given me for Secret Santa, back when I'd still participated in office social events. The succulent, still somehow alive despite everything. That's when it hit me, the full weight of what I'd lost. Not just a job, but my identity. I was Claire Morgan, senior data analyst at Northwood Dynamics. Without that, who was I? But as I sat there, surrounded by the debris of my corporate life, something else began to crystallize. Every late night, every weekend, every sacrifice, they'd all taught me something Richard never expected. I knew Northwood Dynamics better than anyone. I knew its systems, its processes, its vulnerabilities. Most importantly, I knew its secrets. Richard thought he'd silenced me by taking my access, my laptop, my corporate identity. But he'd forgotten that the most dangerous person in any organization isn't the one with the highest title. It's the one who's been invisible in plain sight, quietly observing, documenting, understanding. I pulled out my personal laptop, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. For 4 years, I'd played by the rules, believed in the system, trusted that hard work and honesty would be rewarded. That Claire died at 9:20 this morning on a cold sidewalk, holding a cardboard box. The woman sitting at this kitchen table was someone different, someone who understood that justice wasn't going to come from HR complaints or exit interviews. If I wanted justice, I'd have to take it myself, and I knew exactly where to start. The clock on my wall read 10:47 a.m. Richard had no idea, but he had less than 7 hours left in the corner office he loved so much. 7 hours before his carefully constructed empire came crashing down. This time, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. My personal laptop hummed to life, and I began my counterattack with surgical precision. First, I accessed my personal cloud storage, the place where I'd been backing up evidence for months. A habit born from paranoia that now felt like prophecy. Every suspicious email, every altered report, every questionable transaction was there, organized in folders with timestamps and detailed notes. The Morrison Project folder alone contained enough to bury Richard. Screenshots of the original budgets versus the ones he'd presented. The phantom consulting firm, Pinnacle Advisory Services, that had received $400,000 in payments but had no website, no employees, no actual existence beyond a bank account. I'd traced it back to a shell company registered in Delaware. And while I couldn't definitively prove Richard owned it, the patterns were damning. But I needed more than old evidence. I needed real-time proof, and I needed allies. I texted Tom from IT first. We'd become friends over countless help desk tickets and coffee breaks. Tom, I need to ask you something off the record. Can you check if my personal email is still receiving forwards from the system? His response came quickly. Already checked? Richard had your access cut immediately, but... Interesting thing. The automated reports you set up 3 months ago, they're still running, sending to your personal Gmail. My heart raced. I'd forgotten about those automated reports I'd configured to track project expenditures, sending copies to my personal email as a backup in case the system crashed. Richard didn't even know they existed. I opened my Gmail. There they were, this morning's reports, including transactions Richard had approved just an hour after firing me. Another $50,000 transfer to Pinnacle Advisory Services, authorized at 10:15 a.m. Next, I called Marcus Thompson, my former colleague who'd left Northwood 6 months ago to become a compliance officer at the SEC. We'd stayed in touch, bonding over our shared frustration with corporate corruption. Claire, shouldn't you be at work? Not anymore. Richard finally pulled the trigger. But Marcus, I need your advice. Hypothetically speaking, if someone had evidence of embezzlement and fraud at a mid-sized firm, what would be the best way to ensure it reached the right people? There was a pause. Hypothetically, internal audit first, simultaneously with the board of directors, make it impossible to bury. And Claire, document everything, timestamps, email chains, the works. My next call was to Jennifer Walsh, an attorney who'd gone to college with my roommate. She agreed to see me immediately, professional courtesy, she said. But I heard the intrigue in her voice when I mentioned corporate fraud. By noon, I was in her downtown office, laying out the evidence. Jennifer's expression grew increasingly serious as she reviewed the documents. This is extensive, she said. You've built a federal case here. The shell company, the falsified reports, the systematic embezzlement. Richard's looking at serious jail time if this is verified. I don't want jail time, I said. I just want him gone. Today? She raised an eyebrow. Today's ambitious. He has a board meeting at 5 p.m., virtual, but with all the senior executives and board members. I know because I used to prepare his presentation materials. Jennifer leaned back, a small smile playing on her lips. You want to destroy him in front of everyone who matters. I want them to see who he really is. We spent the next 2 hours crafting the perfect disclosure package. Jennifer helped me write a concise but devastating summary that even board members with no financial background could understand. We highlighted the paper trail, the pattern of transactions, the systematic nature of the fraud. Meanwhile, Tom had been doing his own investigation. He texted me screenshots showing Richard had been accessing the system all morning, frantically trying to delete files and alter records. But Tom had already backed everything up. He's panicking, Tom wrote. He's trying to modify the audit logs, but he doesn't know I mirror everything to a secure server. Got it all preserved. Sarah from accounting reached out next. Claire, Richard's been asking weird questions about old Morrison reports. He seems nervous. What's going on? Check your personal email in about an hour, I told her, and make sure you're near a computer at 5 p.m. By 3 p.m., I had everything ready. The evidence package was comprehensive but accessible, a masterpiece of clarity that would be impossible to ignore or misunderstand. Jennifer had contacted a friend at the state attorney general's office, putting them on standby. Tom had secured all the digital evidence, and I'd discovered something else. 3 other employees Richard had suddenly fired over the past 2 years, all of whom had questioned suspicious transactions. I reached out to them. All 3 were eager to share their stories. At 4 p.m., I made my final preparation. I created a new email account, not anonymous. I wanted my name on this and drafted the email that would end Richard Halpern's career. The recipient list included every board member, the CEO, the CFO, the head of legal, and, critically, the external auditors who were due to review Northwood's books next month. In the CC field, I added the SEC Compliance Department and the State Attorney General's office. Subject line: Urgent. Evidence of systematic fraud and embezzlement by Richard Halpern. Immediate action required. My finger hovered over the send button. Once I pressed it, there was no going back. But then I remembered his words from this morning. Adequate. Nothing personal. The casual cruelty of a man who thought he was untouchable. I checked the clock. 4:47 p.m. 13 minutes before his meeting. I pressed send. The email went out at 4:47 p.m., and within minutes, my phone began buzzing with red receipts. Board members opening the message, the CEO, the CFO, one by one. They were seeing what Richard Halpern really was. The evidence I'd compiled was irrefutable. The centerpiece was the Pinnacle Advisory Services scam. $1.8 million siphoned over 18 months through fabricated consulting fees. I'd included the bank records Tom had preserved, showing deposits from Pinnacle into an account that, while not directly in Richard's name, was registered to an LLC whose sole member was Richard's wife's maiden name. Amateur hour for someone who thought he was so clever. But the fraud went deeper. Richard had been systematically inflating project costs, skimming the overages, and then cooking the books to hide the discrepancies. The Morrison project alone had been overbilled by $600,000, with the excess flowing through a labyrinth of false invoices and shell companies. I'd mapped it all out in a flowchart so clear a child could follow the money. Then there were the human casualties. I'd documented how Richard had strategically fired or demoted anyone who'd noticed irregularities. Janet Chen from procurement, let go 13 months ago after questioning duplicate vendor payments. David Park, demoted after flagging suspicious overtime charges. Monica Rivera, forced out after discovering the Pinnacle connection. Each termination conveniently timed just before they could escalate their concerns. My phone rang. Tom. Claire, you need to see this. Richard just tried to delete the entire Morrison project folder from the server. The actual whole folder. He's in full panic mode. Can he? No, I locked him out 10 minutes ago. Said it was scheduled maintenance. But Claire, he's losing it. He just called IT screaming about system access. I've never heard him like this. Sarah texted next. Richard just ran past accounting. His face was purple. What did you do? Then, at 4:56 p.m., an email popped into my inbox. From Harold Morrison himself, CEO of Morrison Industries, Northwood's biggest client. Ms. Morgan, I've just reviewed your documentation. This is deeply disturbing. I'm joining the Northwood board meeting in 4 minutes to demand answers. You've done the right thing. My laptop screen lit up with an invitation. Jennifer had arranged for us to observe the board meeting through a legal compliance link. You need to see this, she said when I called. It's about to get interesting. At 5 p.m. sharp, the meeting began. I could see the Brady Bunch-style grid of video feeds. Richard was there, sitting in his office, trying to maintain his usual confident demeanor. But I could see the sweat on his forehead, the tremor in his hands. CEO Margaret Wells opened with pleasantries. Then her expression hardened. Before we begin our scheduled agenda, we need to address an urgent matter. We've received extremely serious allegations about financial misconduct. Richard's practiced smile faltered. Margaret, I'm not sure what you're referring to, but I'm referring to the comprehensive evidence package we all received 13 minutes ago. Richard, the one detailing systematic embezzlement, fraud, and gross misconduct. This is obviously a vindictive attack from a disgruntled former employee. Richard started, his voice climbing. Claire Morgan was terminated this morning for performance issues. And this is clearly. Harold Morrison's face appeared on screen. Mr. Halpern, are you suggesting Ms. Morgan fabricated 18 months of bank records, created false documentation going back years? Because I've had my forensic accounting team reviewing this for the past 10 minutes, and they're telling me this is real. The General Counsel, Patricia Kumar, spoke next. Richard, I need you to answer very carefully. Did you authorize payments to Pinnacle Advisory Services? Of course. They're a legitimate consulting firm. Can you provide their address, their employees' names, any deliverables they've produced? Silence. CFO Michael Torres pulled up a screen share. I'm looking at this morning's transactions. Richard, you authorized another $50,000 payment to Pinnacle at 10:15 a.m. Can you explain what services they provided for that payment? Richard's composure finally cracked. This is a witch hunt. I've delivered consistent results for this company. You've stolen nearly $2 million from this company. Margaret Wells cut him off, her voice arctic. And from our clients. Board member James Chen spoke up. I motion for immediate termination of Richard Halpern, pending criminal investigation. Seconded, 3 voices said simultaneously. Richard's face went from red to white. You can't, I have a contract. Which is void in cases of gross misconduct and criminal activity. Patricia Kumar stated, the motion passes. Richard, your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security is on their way to your office. Do not touch any files. Do not access any systems. Do not remove anything except personal items that will be inspected. The feed from Richard's camera shook as he stood up, his face contorted with rage. This is Morgan, that little... The feed cut off as security arrived. Margaret Wells continued, her voice steady. Patricia, please coordinate with law enforcement. Michael, initiate a full forensic audit. And someone... She paused, looking directly into the camera. Someone please draft an offer letter for Claire Morgan. We're going to need her help untangling this mess. And I believe we owe her an apology. The meeting continued, but I closed my laptop. I didn't need to see more. The board meeting was still in session when Tom started live texting me the scene from the 14th floor. Security just arrived at Richard's office. 2 guards. He's arguing with them. Can hear him through the walls. Now he's throwing things in a banker's box, very aggressively. He just tried to take his laptop. Security stopped him. Claire, he's completely lost it, yelling about lawyers and lawsuits. Sarah's update came next. Everyone's gathered by the windows. This is insane. At 5:15 p.m., my phone rang. Margaret Wells herself. Ms. Morgan, I know this has been an extraordinarily difficult day for you. I want to personally apologize for what happened this morning. It's clear we failed in our oversight, and you paid the price for our negligence. Thank you, Ms. Wells. I managed, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The board has voted unanimously. Richard Halpern's employment has been terminated with cause. We're pursuing criminal charges, and we'll need your cooperation with the investigation. But more importantly, we'd like to offer you a position, not your old one, but as Senior Director of Compliance and Internal Audit. We need someone who understands our vulnerabilities and has the integrity to address them. I nearly dropped the phone. Senior Director, that was 3 levels above my old position. I'll need to think about it, I said, surprising myself. Of course, take your time. But Ms. Morgan? Thank you. Your courage today saved this company. Jennifer, who'd been listening, gave me a thumbs up. Get it in writing, she mouthed. Then Tom sent a video. Shaky phone footage from the 14th floor. Richard being escorted out, his banker's box clutched against his chest, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. The same walk I'd made 8 hours earlier, but so different. Where I'd maintained dignity in defeat, he radiated rage and entitlement, even in disgrace. The elevator doors were closing when he spotted someone filming, his last words caught on camera. You're all going to regret this. But the most striking part wasn't Richard's downfall, it was the reaction of our colleagues. The same people who'd averted their eyes this morning were now recording, whispering, some even applauding softly. The king was dead. And everyone suddenly remembered they'd never liked him anyway. Sarah called. "Claire, you should see this. His office, they've already changed the locks. Facilities is boxing up everything. And get this, they found a second laptop hidden in his desk. It's saying it's full of encrypted files." "Let me guess," I said. "More evidence he thought he'd destroyed." "Probably." "Oh, and HR just sent out an email. There's going to be a full investigation into all terminations from the past 3 years. They're specifically looking at people who were let go after raising concerns." Patricia Kumar called next. "Ms. Morgan, I'm obligated to inform you that we've contacted the FBI. This appears to cross state lines, making it a federal matter. They'll want to speak with you." "I'll make myself available," I said. By 5:30 p.m., the news had exploded through the corporate network. LinkedIn was already buzzing. Someone had leaked that a senior executive at Northwood Dynamics had been terminated for embezzlement. Richard's profile, which had listed him as Vice President of Strategic Analytics just hours ago, had vanished. Tom forwarded me security footage with a timestamp of 5:23 p.m. Richard in the lobby, being formally trespassed from the building. The security guard reading from a card. "Mr. Halpern, you are hereby banned from all Northwood Dynamics properties. Any attempt to return will result in arrest." Richard's response was inaudible, but his body language screamed defiance. He gestured wildly, pointed at the building, took a step toward the security guard before thinking better of it. Then he was outside, standing exactly where I'd stood this morning, holding his own cardboard box of shame. But unlike me, no one would hire Richard Halpern again. Word travels fast in Ravenport's business community. By tomorrow, every firm in the city would know he was under FBI investigation for embezzlement. His career wasn't just over, it was radioactive. Monica Rivera, one of the employees Richard had forced out, texted me. "Just saw the news. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. He destroyed my confidence, made me question my own competence. Seeing this, it's like I can breathe again." At 5:45 p.m., as the sun set over Ravenport's skyline, I stood at my apartment window with Fitzgerald purring in my arms. Below, the city continued its relentless pace, unaware that justice had been served in a glass tower on Madison Street. My phone buzzed with one final message from Tom. "Richard just posted on LinkedIn. He's claiming he's a victim of corporate politics and is seeking new opportunities. The comments are not supportive." I didn't look. Richard Halpern was already becoming irrelevant, a cautionary tale about hubris and greed. By tomorrow, he'd be yesterday's news. By next week, a footnote. By next month, forgotten entirely except by the FBI agents building their case. The man who'd ended my career at 9 a.m. had seen his own career obliterated by 5:30 p.m., 8.5 hours from executioner to executed. I smiled, remembering his words from this morning. Nothing personal. He was right. It wasn't personal. It was justice. The next morning, Wednesday, the Ravenport Business Journal ran a front-page story. Northwood Dynamics executive terminated amid federal fraud investigation. Richard's professional headshot stared out from newsstands across the city, the word embezzlement in bold letters beneath his confident smile. I sat in Murphy's coffee shop, the same place where I'd broken down yesterday, reading the coverage on my tablet. The journalist had done their homework. They'd found 3 other companies where Richard had worked previously, all of which had experienced accounting irregularities during his tenure. A pattern stretching back 15 years. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Recruiters who'd never returned my calls were suddenly very interested in my proven integrity and analytical expertise. Former colleagues reached out with variations of, "I always knew something was off about him," and "You're a hero for exposing this." But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt hollow. At 10 a.m., I met with FBI Special Agent Diana Foster in a conference room at the federal building. She was thorough, methodical, recording everything as I walked her through the evidence again. Ms. Morgan, what you've documented here, this is going to result in serious federal charges. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. He's looking at 15 to 20 years if convicted. Will it stick? I asked. With your evidence? He doesn't have a chance. But I need to ask. Why didn't you report this sooner? I thought about all the reasons. Fear. Hope that I was wrong. The naive belief that the system would self-correct. I tried to handle it internally first. I thought if I confronted him, he'd stop. I was wrong. Agent Foster nodded. They usually don't stop. They just get better at hiding it. By noon, Richard's unraveling was complete. Tom forwarded me a news alert. Richard had been arrested at his home in Westbrook Heights, the exclusive suburb where he'd lived in a $2.3 million house. The footage showed him being led away in handcuffs, trying to shield his face from the cameras. His wife, Catherine, stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of shock and fury. Sarah called. You're not going to believe this. Catherine Halpern just filed for divorce. Apparently, she had no idea about any of it. She's claiming he hid assets from her, too. The dominoes kept falling. By 2 p.m., Morrison Industries announced they were conducting a full audit of all projects Richard had overseen. 2 other clients followed suit. Northwood's stock price dropped 12% before recovering slightly on news of the swift action taken by the board. Margaret Wells held an all-hands meeting at 3 p.m., which I watched via a live-stream link she'd sent me. She didn't mince words. We failed you. We failed to provide proper oversight, failed to listen to concerns, and failed to protect employees who tried to do the right thing. That changes today. We're implementing new whistleblower protections, establishing an anonymous ethics hotline, and creating an independent compliance committee. And I want to publicly thank Claire Morgan, whose courage and integrity saved this company from far worse consequences. The applause, Tom told me later, was thunderous. But the cost of Richard's crimes became clearer as the day progressed. The investigation revealed he'd been padding project costs for years, damaging client relationships and costing legitimate bonuses for honest employees. 3 major contracts were now in jeopardy. Dozens of people's work had been tainted by association with his fraudulent reports. At 4 p.m., I got an unexpected call from David Park, one of the employees Richard had demoted. Claire, I just wanted to thank you. After Richard pushed me out of senior analysis, I almost left the industry entirely. I thought I wasn't good enough, that I'd failed somehow. Now I know it was never about my performance. You've given me back my confidence. Similar calls came from others Richard had wronged. Each story was a variation on the same theme: gaslighting, manipulation, careers derailed by a man who saw people as either useful tools or potential threats. By 5 p.m., exactly 24 hours after Richard's termination, the full scope of his destruction was clear. Beyond the money, he'd damaged dozens of careers, destroyed morale, and created a culture of fear that had infected the entire analytics department. The senior leadership team announced they were bringing in external consultants to assess and repair the organizational damage. I stood at the same window where I'd watched the sunset yesterday. But everything had changed. Richard Halpern, who'd walked into his corner office yesterday morning as a respected executive, was now sitting in federal detention awaiting a bail hearing. His assets were frozen, his reputation destroyed, his marriage over, his future reduced to a potential prison cell. The local news at 6 p.m. led with his arrest. They'd found a photo from last year's company gala, Richard in a tuxedo, raising a champagne glass, the picture of corporate success. They contrasted it with his arrest photo, disheveled, defeated. His eyes hollow with the realization that his empire of lies had finally collapsed. In a stunning reversal, the anchor said, the executive who fired a whistleblower yesterday morning found himself terminated and arrested by day's end, proving that sometimes justice truly is swift. But I knew better. Justice wasn't swift. I'd been collecting evidence for months, watching him steal and lie while good people suffered. Justice had finally arrived, but it had taken far too long. Still, as I watched Richard's professional obituary play out on the evening news, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not joy, but a quiet sense of completion. The man who'd thought he could destroy me with a 10-minute meeting had learned that some people don't simply disappear when you try to erase them. Some people fight back. And sometimes, just sometimes, they win. 3 weeks later, I walked back into the Northwood Dynamics building for the first time since being escorted out. But this time, I entered through the main entrance with a new executive access badge reading, Claire Morgan, Senior Director of Compliance and Internal Audit. The security guard who'd walked me out that morning recognized me. "Welcome back, Ms. Morgan," he said with genuine warmth. "We're glad you're here." The 14th floor looked the same, but felt entirely different. Richard's corner office had been converted into a collaboration space. Margaret Wells's symbolic gesture that no single person should wield unchecked power again. My new office was modest but had something Richard's never did: respect from every person who passed by. Over the following months, I helped unravel the full extent of Richard's crimes. The FBI built an airtight case with my documentation. He was indicted on 37 counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Facing overwhelming evidence, his lawyers advised him to take a plea deal: 12 years in federal prison, $3, $2 million in restitution, and a lifetime ban from serving as an officer in any public company. The day Richard was sentenced, I didn't attend the courtroom proceedings. I was too busy implementing the new compliance systems that would prevent another Richard Halpern from ever taking root at Northwood again. But Tom sent me a photo from outside the courthouse: Richard in an ill-fitting suit, his attorney speaking to reporters while he stood silent. A broken man who'd lost everything trying to have it all. Catherine Halpern got the house in the divorce but had to sell it to pay legal fees. She returned to using her maiden name and moved to Seattle to start over. The kids Richard had mentioned in every company bio, the ones he'd used to humanize his image, now refused to speak to him. The other employees he'd wronged were made whole. Janet, David, and Monica were offered their positions back with full back pay and formal apologies. Monica returned. The others had moved on to better opportunities but appreciated the gesture. The company established a scholarship fund in their names for business ethics education. 6 months after that morning in Conference Room B, Northwood had transformed. The toxic culture Richard had cultivated was slowly healing. People felt safe speaking up about concerns. The anonymous hotline I'd insisted on had already caught 2 other instances of minor fraud before they could metastasize. But the real vindication came in small moments. Former colleagues stopping me in the hallway to share how much healthier the workplace felt. Clients expressing renewed confidence in our integrity. Young analysts telling me I'd inspired them to always document everything and never stay silent about wrongdoing. One evening, as I was leaving the office at a reasonable hour, something I'd learned to do in my new role, I passed Conference Room B. The same cramped, windowless room where Richard had ended my career with casual cruelty. Someone had booked it for a birthday celebration. Through the glass door, I could see cake and laughter, life and joy in a space that had once held only termination and tears. I thought about Richard then, probably lying on a narrow bunk in a federal prison cell, wearing a number instead of an Armani suit. Did he think about that morning? Did he replay the moment he decided to fire me, not knowing he was signing his own professional death warrant? I'd never know. And I realized I didn't care. Richard Halpern had become what he'd tried to make me: irrelevant, erased. A cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and greed. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. Saw the news about Northwood winning the Morrison contract renewal. Your mother and I are so proud of you, sweetheart. You stood up to a bully and won. But that wasn't quite right. I hadn't won. I'd survived. And then I'd made sure Richard faced consequences for his actions. There's a difference between revenge and justice, though sometimes they arrive at the same destination. As I walked out of the building that evening, I passed the spot on the sidewalk where I'd stood with my cardboard box 9 months earlier, devastated and humiliated. Now I stood there as someone different, not because of the title or the vindication, but because I'd learned that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are just the first act in a story we're strong enough to rewrite. Richard thought he'd ended my story at 9 a.m. that morning. But stories don't end when villains think they do. They end when the truth finally speaks. He thought he'd broken me at 9 in the morning. By 5 that evening, he was the one who was broken. And that's not revenge, that's justice. The only difference is the paperwork. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever faced a similar situation at work? How did you handle it? Your experiences matter, and I'd love to hear them. Until next time. Remember, document everything. Trust your instincts and never let anyone make you feel small for doing the right thing.